Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Adam Goodman, partner at Ballard Partners. As you know, the first presidential debate for the GOP was Wednesday night, and there is a lot to discuss and break down. First, I want your initial reaction. What are your thoughts?
Well, 24 million people turned into the Fox News debate. Millions more turned into the non-debate between Tucker Carlson and the former president. It was a night of full entertainment. You know, politics is a lot of things, but it's also entertaining at times. And I think we got a belly full of that last night.
If you turned on the debate, you did leave entertained, but who do you think the winners were and who do you think those losers were?
Well, this was a night for first and second impressions. So the first impressions really focused more on the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, Senator Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, the governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum, Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas. But it was also a night for second impressions. And I think the one who scored the best on that front was clearly Nikki Haley. I think she was seasoned, purposeful. She was fully engaging. I think she gave as well as she received. I think she really showed something I think people either hadn't seen in her or maybe had long forgotten. So I think it was a big night for her second impression. And of course, Vivek Ramaswamy is going to be a part of the conversation, whether you like him or not. And he has got a different kind of message than the rest of the contenders. And how that plays, I don't know. I mean, that's an X factor. I think he's going to be very big on social media in terms of a viral sensation, but I'm not so sure he's going to go viral in terms of being a legitimate contender for the chop job.
He for sure went viral last night. I mean, most of the fighting and the sparring on stage was between him and Mike Pence. Nikki Haley, like you said, was the one to land, I think, the most impactful punch on him, saying you don't know foreign policy, and it shows. But what do you think it says that everyone was attacking him and not the number two, which is Ron DeSantis? What does that say about Vivek Ramaswamy, and what does that say about Governor Ron DeSantis?
I think there's a perception, perhaps, that at least on stage, that Ramaswamy has potentially more upside than the governor of Florida. That's part of this. Part of this also is just the personality of Vivek Ramaswamy. Let's just say he's full of confidence, and it's hard not to want to engage with someone like that who has a very thin resume in public service. In fact, a non-resume in public service versus those who have spent, some of them, a lifetime doing just that. So I think where that goes again for him is unknown. The governor of Florida, I think, did little harm to himself last night, but didn't really make any great advances. I think the one thing that may stand out, however, is his suggestion maybe he's ready to invade Mexico and not defend Ukraine. I think that was kind of something he's going to have to not spin, he's going to have to address in the coming days.
Let's talk about the governor of Florida a little bit more. He's been consistently polling second to former President Donald Trump, but he's been getting criticized that he's not likable. He's not that candidate you can grab a beer with. He's a little awkward on the campaign trail. Did he do anything to kind of change or shake that impression, A? And B, what did you think of his messaging last night?
Well, I think he tried to shake the impression that he's somewhat robotic at times. But he's a different kind of political leader. He always has been. He's very, very deep intellectually. When he comes to a decision on an issue, it's not something that comes off a talking point from a political operative. He went where the herd was not heading, especially during COVID in the first 6 months of COVID. There's a lot of courage that goes into that. But if you want him to be a stand-up entertainer, not his shtick. And in a way, this debate, I think just being okay in the debate was probably a score for him because I think the expectation about his ability to be facile in that kind of environment was not very, very big or optimistic.
I do also want to get your take on former Vice President Mike Pence. He was surprising to me. He definitely came off more assertive than we've ever seen him on a national stage, because when you think of him as Donald Trump's sidekick, obviously, until they parted ways on January 6th. What did you think of his performance last night?
I think the conservative part of the audience liked a lot of what he said. He has a difficulty, though, this face it, Brittany, of trying to separate himself from the former president. He kept referring to the achievements of the Trump-Pence administration, and yet here he is running against his former partner. That's something that's kind of hard to explain away. But there's also something else. I think there's, and maybe Vivek Ramaswamy brought that out because he was standing not far from Mike Pence. He feels very 90-ish to me, that it's almost like a politician would perform if you go back into debates in the 90s and even the early 2000s. I don't think there was a great freshness to his message. There was some class to it. There was some courage to it, but not freshness. And I think that, plus, again, being tied at the hip to his former partner, dancing partner, is going to be something he's going to find very, very difficult to untether.
Let's talk about that former partner a little bit more. Bret Baier said last night, Donald Trump's the elephant not in the room. Do you think that benefited Donald Trump himself, that he wasn't on that stage, but instead participated in that interview with Tucker Carlson that was released on Twitter at the same time?
What you try to do in this industry, when you're worried about a message spinning out of control, is you don't throw press conferences. You do one-on-ones with a friendly reporter. In this case, Tucker Carlson, even though he's not, let's say, always loved the former president, that was friendly. That was a friendly interview. And that was exactly what the president and his advisors wanted. It's exactly what they got. It's funny how he came out and said, and you would laugh at this, Brittany, 100 million plus viewers, when in fact, we know how it works with the internet. But he probably had millions and millions of people that tuned in for much, if not all, of that interview. And he showed once again, love him or hate him, that he is incredibly entertaining and engaging. And I think you saw that in that interview. And his kind of opinion that he's looking at the debate as a race for who I might consider for my running mate, kind of puts it where it is. But we are in wholly uncharted waters, Brittany. There's no script that's ever been written like this. And even as we're speaking in this interview, knowing that the former president is headed at some point today to Atlanta to face the music and another series of indictment charges, says we have no bloody idea where it's all going, except the former president, who understands one thing and nothing else: audience. As long as he feels he has more people looking at him, listening to him, and reacting to him, he feels he's winning the game, whatever it may be. And I think last night was one of those times, despite the 24 million that tuned into Fox, he had millions and millions who did not and were listening to the latest ruminations of the former president.
As you said, he's heading down to Georgia right now, or if not later today, and all eyes will be on him then. Do you think that's going to take the air out of a lot of maybe the movement from last night's debate?
No question. But here are my predictions. One, he was the show going into the debate last night, even though he wasn't there. He is the show today, coming out of the debate and moving his way via private jet to Fulton County, and he will remain, I think, the focus for a foreseeable future. What will change, I think, Brittany, from last night is there potentially another challenger if the president starts to head earthward? Is there another challenger that comes out of that pack yesterday beyond the governor of Florida? I think you might see one emerge, and knowing what happens in this business, and my prediction being that Nikki Haley is going to probably get more than a little bit of a bump in the polls. She might actually be within shouting distance of the governor of Florida after last night. You know what happens next? He and everyone else will likely train their fire on her. And, after the debate, as they see her starting to make a move, it's always who's most popular that then becomes the center of the target for everybody else that wants to be the next most popular person up. And so I think that's ahead for her. And I think Vivek Ramaswamy, especially with younger voters and the fed up with the process kind of voters, even though there are a lot of demerits, I think, to his performance last night in terms of the way he presented himself, I think his message is something that people are going to be talking about.
I know you mentioned Nikki Haley was the star of that debate. A lot of people on the internet, on cable news, seem to agree with that take. So, do you think anyone on the flip side maybe broke their campaign? Maybe the debate was a step back for them?
Yes, great question. Well, first of all, the non-contenders, I'll call them, Asa Hutchinson and the governor of North Carolina, Doug Burgum. You have to give him credit. I mean, just standing for 2 hours on a hurt leg, right, after his basketball mishap. They were irrelevant going in. They're even further irrelevant coming out. I think Chris Christie did his best to try to remain relevant, but I've never seen what his true path ahead is. He's not auditioning for vice president. I think he's auditioning for legacy. I think Mike Pence, I think probably steadied himself from last night's performance. The governor of Florida, I don't expect to see any move in his numbers, but I don't think he necessarily hurt himself. In terms of anybody else kind of moving backwards, I think Tim Scott. Now, it's hard for to say he moved backwards because he started at 3 or 4% in the polls. I thought, had maybe the largest upside going into last night. Great guy, great resume, would make a great partner, frankly, for the former president if he is the nominee for president in 24. But I don't think he ever really communicated the power of his life story, which, and you might say more broadly, Brittany, last night, you'd be hard-pressed to find something to feel optimistic about. And this was not a shot in the arm to the American public of confidence. It was a shot to the solar plexus of the political establishment about all the things that are wrong. And I think Americans are hungry for something to believe in, to aspire to feel could be big and bold and wonderful ahead. I don't think anybody on stage delivered that last night, and America's still looking for just that. And if anyone can deliver on that front, I think you might see another surge that has nothing to do with the debate stage, but with the psyche of Americans who are tired of being beaten down and want something to rally around.
And how important do you think last night's debate was for these contenders and for the American people?
It was very important that the American people were exposed to a lot of the arguments, and not just the personality arguments, really the substantive ones. If you would say, what was I most disappointed in last night? I think we gave short shrift to things like China. I mean, that barely got a ripple of attention last night versus the focus on, will you support a convicted former president of the United States if he's the nominee? I think we lost out in learning more about the options that are really truly in front of us. That are not being presented by the current administration. I don't think we got a lot of that other than right off the bat in economics and the whole thing about Bidenomics, which I would equate to the early days of Obamacare. I mean, I think that is something that where the president set himself up for a big fall with the idea in braggadocio fashion that somehow he has unlocked the keys to the economic future of the nation.
I was really surprised China wasn't a larger topic last night. I was in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair just 2 weeks ago, and that's what candidates were talking about the most. Aside from the economy, they were talking about China, China, China. Do you think that's to the detriment of Bret Baier and Martha McCallum? How do you think they did as moderators?
I give them an okay score. I thought at the end of the debate when they went the lightning round and threw the UFO question in, I mean, that's like clickbait stuff, right? And that had no place in that debate. I'm sorry they went that way. I didn't think the opener was all that sharp either. They thought they were being creative with the song coming into the debate. That was, I think, unnecessary. And I think at times they lost control of the debate. However, that debate stage was not one that was going to be controlled, right? However, they tried to, despite their best efforts to keep everyone in line, that wasn't going to happen. But the China question, which I think is on the, as you say, is on the minds of a lot of people, and should be actually one of the biggest assets in the quiver of any Republican nominee going against the current president. That really got almost no attention, and it has to, because what we know is ahead is going to fill volumes of history books to come in the new competition among the two big superpowers on the planet.
Moderating that debate is definitely a job. It might be a thankless job, I would say. So, but What other topics do you think that were missed that you wish were discussed more? Because they did hit a wide array, but there weren't many deep dives.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things is, law and order has always been something that's been a staple of Republican rhetoric, right? More police on the streets, obeying the laws. I think someone said, we need to have a nation where laws apply to everyone, and there's not a selectivity to it. I thought that Governor Christie, like the most telling point he had, was talking about his experience as a prosecutor and how prosecutors and DAs across the land are not enforcing the laws, or choosing not to. And actually, DeSantis mentioned in his remarks that he took two out of play. I mean, literally, he retired them early because they weren't, in his opinion, upholding the law. I think that's a more promising way for Republicans to move forward. And they all agree that America's cities, in terms of law and order, and homelessness was also, in that category, are a mess right now. They blame it on lack of leadership. I think we need big answers in America's cities, because I think everyone believes that if they continue to head south, there's no path that has the country heading north.
We saw 8 presidential contenders last night speaking. Based on what you saw last night, and maybe what you didn't see, what do you think is the future of the GOP?
Unknown. I mean, you have the Mike Pence school, and even Asa Hutchinson and others that come from more classic conservative, Republican model. You have those who have run in blue states, like former Governor Christie, who made a big point. It's a good point, by the way, that you have to have a message that appeals to a broader audience. You have Ramaswamy, who is a whirling dervish of all sorts of stuff, right? It's auditioning to be, Trump Jr., and there is an audience for that. But in terms of where the party's headed, I think the mainstream Republicans would hope it's headed more in the direction of someone like a Nikki Haley in terms of her message, her maturity, and her conservatism than it is some of the others that were on stage that night.
And looking forward, looking ahead, we have another debate in a month. What should we look out for between now and then?
You learn a lot from your first debate. And, the governor of Florida has debated before, in his campaigns for governor. This was his first presidential debate. He had the Uber, debate coach apparently in play. I think he's going to learn a lot about what to do and not to do, as others will on stage. You'll see different kinds of performances. And I think maybe instead of Ramaswamy being the target of most of the other contenders on stage, you'll find someone like Nikki Haley who's going to be right in the middle of that target. There are things I'm sure she has to answer for, and those were not brought out last night. They will be, I think, in the next debate. And I think right now it's a race for second, with the idea that if the former president, Donald Trump, suddenly meets his political maker and comes hurling down to earth, who might be the one who could suddenly surge? That's not something any of them control that are on stage or are contending for the presidency. They're keeping their fingers crossed that if that does happen, they're in position to make the move. And I think that's what we're looking for. Others more cryptic, others more cynical would say this is nothing more than a race for vice president and cabinet post at this point.
How precarious do you think Ron DeSantis' spot as number 2 is? Do you think he could fall at any moment, or do you think he has a safe number 2 spot?
Well, he's got infrastructure that he's built. That's one thing that money affords. And he's been investing in that on the ground, especially in Iowa. It's no surprise that, and you were out there recently. I mean, Iowa is going to be ground zero rather for this fight. The first verdict will come out of Iowa. They're making a big push there. And unlike how you say, well, we didn't do so well there, but our plan all along was to win in New Hampshire. Well, we didn't do well there either. Hey, our firewall is in South Carolina, whatever it is. Iowa, for the governor of Florida, is the first proving pad that he is a legitimate number 2. And I know for a fact he's going to put everything he can into that. He's got competition there. I think Tim Scott also has shown some real political leg of late there, which, especially with evangelicals, it gives him a shot to be maybe a real contender, which even if he didn't win, Brittany, he came in a close second, that might be considered a victory for him and catapult him into New Hampshire. But I think the governor of Florida has to begin to show that he is legitimately the alternative to the former president, beginning in Iowa City.
Adam Goodman, I appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you as always.